Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast, a proud member of the Sinica podcast network. Normally, I'm joined by either Giraud or Cobus, but today we got the whole gang with us, starting with Geronima, our Africa editor, joining us from the beautiful island of Mauritius. And in South Africa, as always, managing editor Cobus van Staden, and our critical minerals editor, Obit Bore, joining us from Zimbabwe, Harare to be specific. A very good morning, good afternoon to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Yes, it's a little bit of both for all of us. Listen, we're going to pick up the conversation where we left off a couple of months ago, talking about this massive Kafue river spill in Zambia. This is a story that just continues to change and evolve. So if you recall, there was this massive spill back in February. It's now led to lawsuits, and now it's led to an outrage in China. And we're going to talk about all of this today. Let me just refresh everybody as to where we are on this story. Some of you may not have remembered what the story was about. Let's take a listen to how Channel 4 News in the UK covered it.
It's February the 18th. An environmental disaster on an historic scale has begun. At a copper mine in Zambia, owned by the Chinese company Sino-Metals, a dam holding back a reservoir of toxic waste has collapsed. What some experts claim is one of the worst and least reported mining accidents ever has been unleashed. Matched, they say, by one of the worst government and industry cover-ups. It is spewing lethal chemical poison, arsenic, cyanide, uranium, lead, mercury and more. Soon, slicks of dead fish line the river shore. Nearly 2/3 of Zambia's 20 million people live along the vast Kafue river system.
Okay, so that is the horrific incident that took place there. Gentlemen, I think we all will agree that the scale of what happened is not really in dispute. This has caused tremendous damage. The way that the Western media has covered it, Giraud, you took issue with the Associated Press and how it killed an entire river. But Giraud, let's start with you. What you heard from Channel 4 News there, does that seem reasonable? Does that seem balanced in how they covered it?
It's reasonable, but yet it doesn't really provide you the real scale of the catastrophe. I understand when you see the image, when you see all of that, you understand there is a massive quantity of chemical products that have been put into the river. That's undeniable. But the scale, it's very important in this debate because the scale of this disaster will determine the way people are approaching the conversation, the way they're shaping it, and the way they're framing it. And of course, it also determines the way we are looking at how the Zambian government is reacting, or the way Sino-Metals is reacting. If we don't have a clear scale of like how much disaster are we talking about here, we're going to have a very biased and distorted conversation because we are not talking about proportion of how the disaster look like. And for me, yes, it's important, but we need to come to a point to say, how much are we talking about here? What surface are we talking about here? Which quantity are you talking about? How deep it went? Because all of that will allow us to tell whether or not a river was killed overnight, or whether or not it's like, yes, what Sino-Metals has been doing, it's enough or it's not enough. And this is, for me, the coverage here doesn't provide yet the clear amount of scale that we do need to have a balanced and clear conversation around this issue.
Okay, so the best coverage of this so far has come from a Zambian media outlet by the name of News Diggers. They did a 1-hour documentary on it where they actually spoke with all of the key personnel involved, at least on the Sino-Metals side of things. They spoke with the Chinese general manager. They also spoke with spokespeople. It's really important for us to hear from them in order to set the baseline of what Sino-Metals itself is saying happened, and then this will then frame the rest of our conversation. So let's take a listen now to a portion of the documentary produced by News Diggers on the spill.
Sino-Metals is a subsidiary of Luansha Mines China Non-Ferrous Metal Mining Company, a Chinese state-owned enterprise engaged in development of non-ferrous metal mineral resource and construction projects for the Asian economic giant. We are in Kalulushi, on the Copperbelt province of Zambia. We take a drive to the scene of the accident, as the company corporate affairs official explains how it all happened.
This tailings dam is basically where the incident started from. If you can see just on the red portion there, that's the portion that was vandalized, where the HDPE material was cut off. And the period that was happening, if you remember, we had quite some heavy rain between January and February. And the cutting of the HDPE material compromised the strength of the dam. This is a dam on its own, right? There's another dam there. But then, because there's a wall in between, when the wall is weakened, it collapses.
Affects the next one.
The flow goes into the next one.
Right.
But then they have a design capacity.
Right.
Okay? So the next dam could not hold the flow from this one. Right. So it also got weakened. Right. So that's basically where the problem started. And it ended up besting the first one now, which is A. Then it was 50,000 cubic meters in total that escaped from this system. You can see there's some remaining already. So 50,000 escaped, 20,000 was retained in our pollution control dam, and then the remainder is what went all the way up to downstream. So the challenge that we have is that there's a lot of intrusion into the dams. It's not an excuse.
But when you say the cuttings of this material, what exactly do you mean? Who cuts it and where does it go?
You know that we have got communities living around the mine. The communities are using this to roof their houses. The part that was vandalized has remained like that because there's an active investigation going on.
Right.
That's why we haven't yet covered that part.
Okay, that is the explanation from Sino-Metals. I wanted to have that. It was a little bit longer than I usually have sound bites, but I thought it was very important for us to set the baseline for the explanation for the company that's happened. Now, Obert, since all of this has happened in February, in the past 6 months now, a lot has happened. There has been an investigation and an assessment done by the company that the government did not hire an outside agency. It let the company pick a South African firm, if I understand, to do the damage assessment. The government has since said they're backing the company Sino-Metals, and there's now been a series of massive lawsuits. Walk us through everything that's happened there before we get to the Chinese reaction.
So with regards to the lawsuits, there are essentially about 3 lawsuits that have been already filed. So the first lawsuit that was filed against Sino-Metal, we're essentially seeking around, I think, $220 million in interim compensation to relocate, I think, about 47 households that are living near the spill site. And in addition to that $220 million lawsuit, the victims were also seeking 9.7 billion for what they are calling Victim and Environmental Rehabilitation Fund, which is more like a fund that they would want established for purposes of long cleanup campaign to ensure that they are able to not live with the consequences. Then the second claim that has been put forward, this was by Malabo and Company. So this is a law firm in Zambia representing several residents of Kalusale. So Kalusale is one of the communities that is downstream that is affected by this disaster. And in their letter of demand, they were seeking 200 million. And again, they are seeking this for purposes of emergency fund to support the communities that are affected, that are particularly in Kalusale community. And this staggering third claim is, I think, what caught a lot of attention also, is $80 billion. So this is the third suit. And this suit was filed on behalf of roughly around 11 farmers. So there are farmers that live downstream that were also affected by the dam spill. And in their lawsuit, they are seeking $80 billion US dollars to be placed in a security fund for remediation and compensation, because their argument is that they have lost their livelihoods, they have lost their farming land. So basically, these are the three major lawsuits that have been filed against Sino-Metal. And what we know is as of now is that it was not only Sino-Metal that received letters of demand. There is another company along the Kafue stream, which is called Longjing. It's also a Chinese company that has also received some of these letters of demand from lawyers representing communities. And from the information that we got recently is that there already are potential conversations that are happening to potentially settle out of court, so that this matter does not get decided by the courts, but the company is potentially seeking to settle out of court.
Okay. $80 billion. Let's keep in mind that the Zambian economy, the GDP last year was $26 billion. So they're effectively asking for more than three times the size of the Zambian economy. Cobus, I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems ridiculous. And it seems like it was a very poor strategy on their part because, number one, that's actually worth more than the valuation of the company itself, 3 times the size of the Zambian economy. It just seems a little bit outrageous to demand that kind of money, knowing that it can never be paid, and it makes it easier for the company just to dismiss this as a frivolous lawsuit. So how are we supposed to process something like this?
Well, I wanted to ask Obert actually whether there's any indication about how they got to that number.
It's also a question that I've trying to seek from the contacts in Zambia that I've been talking to say, how did you quantify that amount? So in legal lawsuits, so there are what are known as quantifiable and non-quantifiables. So things that you can measure, they are able to measure that, okay, this household was producing so much in terms of production from agriculture in a particular year. So this is a loss over 10 years if they are going to be relocated and live somewhere. Then there are this general damage or unquantifiable claims is something that often courts don't entertain. It's very difficult to prove because they can never ascertain the loss to that magnitude of 80 billion. It's ridiculous. So we haven't also gotten any indication from the Zambians as to how they came to this conclusion of claiming that amount of money.
Okay, so Cobus, let me go back to the original question. Yeah. I mean, it's again, Obert's been trying to figure out how it is, but let's say there's a formula behind it. I mean, when we look at the track record of environmental lawsuits against multinational corporations, it's not a very good track record. And so it seems like strategically very poor choices on their part to shoot for 80 billion when if they went for 1 to 2 billion, that could have been settled potentially.
Won't they get to that anyway through some kind of
settlement?
Like that's kind of what I kind of assume is that but like I assume there was this kind of 2 reasons to kind of like put this like very almost like clearly kind of unrealistically high level to it. One is that it's symbolic, right? Kind of that it drives home the full scope of the loss. In a way that is kind of like permanently affecting the global reputation of Sino-Metals, and that sends a kind of a message to the entire metals community, the entire mining community. In the second place is that it's probably a pragmatic kind of like gamble, like making the point if you go for this very high kind of number, you will get argued down, but you may well kind of end up getting more than you would have if you were more modest. That's what I assume probably the thinking behind it is. Jero, what do you think?
No, this is what I wanted to get to you when you say in terms of the permanent of the losses. This is where I get to the first point where we still don't have. There's my problem with all these issues, the fact that neither Zambia, neither the Sino-Metals, no one, even the news digger of the civil society, have been able to quantify the level of loss are we talking about here. Kafue River is 1,500 kilometers of a river. how much portion are we talking about here? Which portion has been of the river has been impacted? To what extent? And we talk about here 80 billion, and the lawsuit is driven by 11 families with farmers. And you want to come to tell me that those 11 families believe that the whole crop what they were making and the livelihood would be equal to 80 billion. I get to the point that yes, it's maybe just a bargain to try to make a bargain to say they're gonna negotiate them. But even if you don't go from 80 billion to even 1 billion just like that, and this is the part where, as I was saying in the beginning, as long as we don't have a clear idea, assessment of anything about this issue, we're gonna go from speculation to speculation, one believing that we're in the right of doing that. And I remember when we had the discussion, we were talking about, I believe that at some point people are just like, let's make Sino-Metal Leach pay for everything we believe that other Chinese companies are doing elsewhere in Zambia, but they're getting away with. So we're gonna make an example of Sino-Metal Leach. I'm not defending Sino-Metal Leach here, but the ideas of saying if you want a fruitful engagement in a way that will resolve the issue, we have to be able to talk about the facts on the ground and the numbers and the proportion to be able to have a very useful conversation. Otherwise, it's going to be ideology, it's going to be posture, it's going to be just feelings that people are putting on the table.
So
the other side I would look at there, right, kind of is that if you look at the scale of what it would take to remove heavy metal, like serious heavy metal pollution from a 1,500 kilometer river, you're talking about massive dredging, massive removal of soil and mud from within the river and on the banks. So
Cobus, I think that's Giro's point. Cobus, I think that's Giro's point. We don't know how much of the river has been impacted. Is it all 1,500 or is it 10 kilometers?
Yes, but at the same time, there is no such easy distinction, right? Kind of because we're talking about an ongoing kind of like river that keeps moving and pollution, a plume of pollution that potentially keeps moving with it. So just being realistic, kind of when you talk about heavy metal pollution in soil, then you're writing off agricultural crops in that soil for generations, unless you're talking about massive ground kind of like topsoil removal, which itself kind of like condemns farming along that route for generations itself. So in terms of just this kind of scale of what rehabilitation would mean, I think that needs to be interrogated as well. Sorry, but you were going to say something.
So 2 points. The fact that Giro is questioning the facts on the ground. When you speak to Zambian communities or the civil society representatives of these communities, they are basing their case on the report that was dismissed by the Zambian government, which is the DRISIT assessment. So they are saying we are going to use the DRISIT assessment to establish to the court of the damage. But of course, we already know that both the company and the Zambian government have dismissed the fact that that is the extent of the damage or the report. Then secondly, in terms of the scale of the damage as to from the spill site to where are we talking about in terms of the distance? So from the U.S. alert that was issued, the U.S. Embassy in Zambia issued the alert, and I think they did some estimation saying from the spill site to about 100 kilometers away that is the area that they suspect is likely
And I'm going to interrupt you there, allow me, because even the US statement, they did not tell you which measurement they use. They did not tell you this is the problem in all this debate. At the end, they've made a communique statement. This is how much it went. But what did you use? What studies did you use? Did you use an independent study, or it was just your personal assessment to the point that you had your diplomats to leave a town to say it's becoming too dangerous? And this is all of that part of the narrative of creating a whole debate and polemic in this issue without having facts on the ground.
And we should also say that the United States has politicized this issue quite a
Exactly.
bit. So the U.S. Embassy said they're evacuating all their personnel. I don't know how many personnel the U.S. Embassy had in the Kafue Rivers Valley. Also, you know, it came up on Congress with the new head of AFRICOM, you know, saying this. So I think the United States is not necessarily a neutral party in all of this, but one of the other factors we have to take into account that does affect the case and the validity of the case is the fact that the government, the Zambian government, from the beginning has come out in full support of Sino-Metals. And so one has to wonder about the credibility of the Zambian courts if the Zambian government and Haikinda Hichilema, the president himself, backing the Sino-Metals side of thing. I mean, Kobus, I don't know what that means. I mean, and that's why they took the case to a court in London. What does that say about governance in Zambia if the government itself, before an investigation has been even completed, said, no, listen, we think Sino-Metals is doing the right thing. Everything's under control. Kobus, let's hear from you. And then Obert, I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, it really looks like a cover up. The thing that would have been, you know, the best thing would have been to make a big show of getting an independent investigator to then kind of like get the assessment and then kind of move from there. But yeah, like, you know, kind of we you know, this isn't doing the Zambian government.
And imagine if you had
a
ruling, an independent assessment, and then a trial in a Zambian court that then issued an impartial ruling. How effective would that be for African governance?
Exactly.
You know, but we're not seeing that. They had to take this to London because they didn't trust or they didn't get a hearing in Lusaka. Obert, what do you hear about the court case?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is previous cases where Zambian communities have sued mining companies. I think that was involving Anglo-American, I think, and Vedanta. I think those are the cases where that was for copper lead poisoning in part of Zambia called Kafue, where there was copper, you know, mining that led to people being formed with deformed beds at so many environmental consequences. So they could not get justice in Zambia, and precisely the reason was at the time Zambian law did not allow class actions. So we are talking of thousands of people suing a company for a particular disaster. So they first sued Anglo-American in South Africa, and they also got a good ruling in South Africa, and also they went to UK to follow their headquarters so that they could actually get justice. Now, for Chinese, there hasn't been any case, as far as I know, where a Chinese company has been followed in China to access justice. That often happens, especially when your local courts, your local judicial system cannot provide justice for the victims. So it is very unlikely that the Zambian judicial system is going to save these communities that are affected by this disaster.
Okay.
I mean, I think the people are just hoping that the court system would be independent, hopefully. But I think from the record that we know, as far as cases have been decided so far in Zambia, we haven't seen the judges or taking the sides of the communities. But it's something that we are yet to see, since this is one of the first, I think, test cases being brought before the judges, especially involving a Chinese state-owned subsidiary.
Obert,
Yeah,
I want to add something on that. Allow me. Do you hear something on the ground where you see a kind of massive popular support around those kind of cases? Because most of the time we have those kind of cases where it's only civil society, getting the fight to the court, but you don't feel the kind of popular uproar behind that say we want justice. Do we see something like this taking place in Zambia around this case? Because $80 billion of a lawsuit is something massive. You could expect that, some people, like on the street, people will out there say, we want justice. Do we see that taking place in Zambia?
We haven't seen that massive demand for justice from the public. I think except that portion of the community that is affected from along the Kafue, it has of course ignited some organizations even from the US, from Europe, also asking questions as to the credibility of the Zambian judicial system, whether it will be able to deliver justice. But I think from the Zambian citizens there hasn't been much. I think it almost seems like also the media is quite silent, except a few that is commenting on these particular cases, which involve essentially those.
I'm glad you brought up the media coverage. It has been an issue that's received quite a bit of Western media coverage. This plays into a lot of anti-Chinese narratives that Western media does like to amplify, and obviously U.S. government officials have talked about it, and U.S. and European NGOs are talking about it. So we've heard from Western media, news diggers. Not so much, guys, that you're seeing in African media. Are you seeing in South Africa, in Mauritius, in Zimbabwe, a lot of coverage on this?
It was covered in South Africa.
So, okay. What about in
Yeah,
Zimbabwe?
In Mauritius, nothing. It's Mauritius barely like one title in the newspaper, and it was gone. It's over now.
Yeah, it wasn't also covered in Zimbabwe, but I thought Zimbabweans would also cover it because Kafue is actually one of the tributary of
That
the
was I was
Zambians.
about to ask. How come
Yeah.
this case at some point someone in Zimbabwe is going to raise the question? We are also starting to be impacted by the pollution.
Yeah.
How it's getting to Zimbabwe? So far I would have expected that
Well,
Zimbabwean lawyers
yeah.
would have been already on the case.
Well, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that the Chinese media is not covering this. We have not seen any, as far as I know, any official or Communist Party media to report on it. So for the most part, there's been a media blackout in China. Again, this is typical for what happens in sensitive and stories, and particularly stories that don't flatter China in that respect. But that being said, in the past weeks, or maybe 1 or 2 weeks since the $80 billion lawsuit came out, there has been an outrage on Chinese social media platforms, WeChat and Weibo, anger over what they were seeing happen here. And we're going to play you some sound that we translated from some of these clips, and I'd like you guys to respond to them. Let's take a listen, and I'm playing for our YouTube viewers. This is the video. What you're going to do is hear part of the audio now.
你看，从溃坝到现在，矿区都停了半年多，为啥迟迟？
Notice how the mine has been shut down for more than half a year since the dam failure. Why no restart? Clearly someone is blocking operations. First tossing out an astronomical figure to scare the company, then waiting until it's desperate to negotiate a settlement. That's plain extortion, and this isn't an isolated case. When Niger's military government just took power, it went after a Chinese oil subsidiary, complaining about wage gaps between locals and Chinese staff, saying there were too many Chinese managers, eventually expelling executives and freezing accounts. In plain terms, they're broke and see Chinese firms as easy prey. Why do these small African countries dare to do this? Because many Chinese companies in Africa are rich but unprotected. No local security backing, no professional overseas protection. Shaking down a Chinese company costs little and pays a lot.
So one of the other themes that we heard in this video and many of the other videos of the commentators was Zambia is poor, and so this $80 billion figure is absurd because they're so poor. Zambia is also very corrupt. They talked about a corruption case from 20 years ago, and many of them repeated the same themes, but we heard that quite a bit. Did anything in that assessment surprise or shock you guys? Giraud, what was your take on that?
Me, I'm not surprised. That I'm also a bit not shocked at the same time. But I'm shocked to a certain extent, where there is a low-key tone and implication or inference in his statement that is saying that we, our Chinese companies, are coming in those poor African countries, helping them out in the difficult situation. We are not protected, and this is how they're repaying us. Basically, This is what he's saying. This is how, and this is why I'm getting frustrated, because, like, man, I mean, we are not targeting you as if you did nothing. We are talking about a case where your company, your Chinese company, has polluted a river, and this is the way you feel that as if it does either it doesn't know about the situation, either just feel that I'm not going to talk about it. And this is about where, in this comment, I was like, no, it's not like you are easy prey. There is a case. We may talk about the extent of which, but there is a case though for people to target.
Yes, but this is the problem. But this is the problem when we deal with these issues in China, because they live in an information vacuum. So when you say that they didn't know in many cases, because the news coverage of this just wasn't there. So that clip that I played at the beginning of the Sino-Metals executive explaining exactly what happened, according to him, is not played in the Chinese media. The way that they framed it in a lot of these commentaries was there was heavy rains, there was a flood, some polluted water got out, they worked with the government, they fixed it, and now they're being extorted for $80 billion. Cobus, you're a media scholar. You follow media studies. When you hear some of these narratives come through in these WeChat clips, I'm going to play two more. What's your first reaction?
But like my first visceral reaction is like, oh, boo-hoo-hoo, it's like cry, 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 whine, 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 kind of. So like, it's like, this is a massive environmental disaster. They should pay.
True.
So like what they should pay is up for discussion, but they should be paying something, and something very significant. This isn't unique to Chinese companies, and I think what kind of many mining companies have spilled many things in many parts of Africa, and I think what underlies what I kind of see under that kind of tone is, it's something quite similar to what one sees in discussions more broadly of Western kind of presence in Africa, is that Africans' job is to suffer. Like they have no other, their role in the transaction is to absorb kind of negative externalities and to suffer. So I have very little sympathy for this, actually, this discussion.
Okay.
And I have quite little sympathy for the company itself, actually. Kind of, I can see it's in a bind, but still,
Well, let me play one more now. And again, listen to some of the themes. And again, I'm only playing, these are 7-minute clips, but what you're seeing on screen for those of you watching are very typical WeChat videos. Some of them highly produced, some of them just voicing over videos. Let's take a listen to this next clip.
听到这个数字啊，你可能跟我一样，第一反应是这怎么可能啊？是不是多写了个亿？
Let's run the numbers. 80 billion US dollars is about 624 billion Hong Kong dollars, while the total market value of China non-ferrous mining is only around 50 billion Hong Kong dollars. In other words, the claim is 12 times the company's entire market cap. This isn't compensation, it's an attempt to bankrupt a Chinese firm. For perspective, Zambia's entire annual GDP is only about $30 billion. This claim equals 2.5 years of the whole country's economy. Clearly unrealistic and unreasonable, it looks far more like a politically motivated performance backed by unseen players. Internationally, such astronomical lawsuits are often not just legal actions but tools of strategic pressure, sometimes exploiting environmental causes for ulterior motives. Who most dislikes seeing China establish roots in Africa? Who keeps calling Chinese investment their resource plundering? The answer is obvious. For years we've heard Western media push narratives about Chinese debt traps and neo-colonialism. Now, ESG issues are the latest front for this pressure campaign. This is fundamentally a battle over standards and narrative power. The West has long controlled global ESG rules. Even when Chinese companies do a lot right, they struggle to tell their story convincingly. Good work is seen as expected, but any slip is framed as a flaw in the China model. So we must not only build projects but also build voice, legal, media, and social responsibility narratives that persuade globally. Great power rivalry isn't just on battlefields. It's fought in media, standards, and values.
Okay, Cobus, you're smiling, but this was a very prominent theme in all of this, was that this is an extension of the great power competition, and that when he says unseen forces, you know exactly who he's talking about. He thinks that it's the United States and the Europeans who are fomenting this, Cobus, I'll come to you because I know you think about this a lot. But again, this everything framed through the great power competition is a very typical Chinese response, whether it's the South China Sea dispute with the Philippines or whether it's here in Zambia. The agency of local actors is often stripped away, and that they are the victims of great power meddling. What's your take on this second clip that we had?
I mean, exactly. It's like, you know, there's very little kind of agency is acknowledged on the African side. It's also, you know, so you know, the logic of it is classic kind of Cold War logic in terms of Africa being essentially an arena for external actors to operate in, and the fact that that's happening in the mineral sector makes it even more Cold War. And so, yeah, you know, so that's interesting. I mean, I was laughing a little bit because it's not like you need some kind of external, you know, kind of nefarious force to convince Africans to be resentful of foreign mining companies. I think they have enough reason on their own. You know, but what's funny for me also is this kind of like high conspiracy kind of framing of ESG, you know, law, which is exactly the kind of the same framing you're seeing out of the Republican Party, and the, you know, the US is, you know, slithering its way out of ESG requirements.
I mean,
as we speak.
certainly
So,
the US is not going to be using ESG as a bludgeon to hit
exactly. Or they only do in this particular case, and then no other cases ever. So yeah, you know, kind of so in overall, I find it quite a kind of a weak argument, even though a lot of the kind of broader points that he makes, you know, like sure, like there is concerted kind of narrative building around these issues, but this is still a massive mining disaster that they caused. So
yeah,
you know.
Jérôme, what's your take on it?
I agree in part to what the commentators say about in this situation. Yes, of course, is downplaying the responsibility of the Chinese company in this crisis, but is also pointing out few important things that, whether or not we like it, kind of comes feed into his argument. When we mentioned, when you have the US embassy starting to release statement and without providing clear assessment of what's coming from, when you have the head of AFRICOM sitting on a Congress mentioning that, when you have different, at the end, if you're in China, you cannot you can just feel that, yes, this is US propaganda. And the amount of money that you put on the table, $80 billion, whether you like it or you're going to say, nah, this is targeted. This is Americans' strategy behind all of that. And especially if you come to find out that some of those NGO organizations are somehow in the past have received financing from USAID or any US related organization. That's it. You have a whole narrative that's built there where it's them against us. And my issue with all of that, this is what I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go back to what I said in the beginning. Having the facts right allows better justice, because when you have ideological debate like this, in the middle, the communities will not find justice, the victim will not find justice, and nothing will be solved, because at the end, each part we're gonna see in this problem as a political opportunity to make points and to win points, and that's it. And this is my problem with all this debate at the end.
Yeah, Obert, listening to that commentator, it reminded me of a lot of what's happened in Zimbabwe over the past 10 years, where there's been accusations of the United States trying to smear China, the U.S. embassy paying people to write bad stories about the Chinese. That was debunked, by the way. But nonetheless, these conspiracy theories are very prominent in Zimbabwe as well. That must have been very familiar to you.
Yeah, I think largely I do agree with you know, with Jiro, because whether you like it or not, you know, China as a state doesn't support a lot of the work of civil society. So let's start there. A lot of civil society organizations are supported by either USAID or even previously supported by USAID, or Western foundations, if you like. So the fact that almost all the civil society organizations that are working in the ESG space or environmental justice space, most of them are supported by either European or American institutions. That on its own also, I think, provide enough, you know, justification for the Chinese to say, well, this is, you know, smearing, you know, the Chinese, you know, there's someone behind it. Of course, I think at the end of the day, you know, justice has to be served. You know, the NGOs are doing their work. You know, who is funding them? Of course, not that it doesn't matter, it does matter, but I think at the end of the day, they have to pay for what they have done. So I completely agree with Giroux, and
So
we have also
every time this happens, one of the things that you hear is that the Chinese have to get better at telling their story, that they're being outplayed by the West. And
which, by the way, you hear from American stakeholders all the time as well about the US. Like the American stakeholders are always complaining that they're not telling their own story effectively. It's very funny,
especially compared to China.
You know, but these commentators were all saying we've got to get out there more. Now here you're looking at video of the head of Sino-Metals in Zambia, who had what I would call a very rough interview for that documentary, and so part of the problem is that the Chinese don't want to participate in international media. We know this because we have been trying for years to interview Chinese guests on the show. Remember, Cobus, back in the early days when we did the podcast 10, 12 years ago, it wasn't that difficult to get Chinese professors, diplomats, scholars, business people. We had quite a few on. I never really thought that hard about it. I would send out 10 emails, 3 would come back, 2 would say yes, and we had quite a few. If you go back into our archives, you'll see quite a few Chinese scholars. That is all dried up. No one comes today. The emails get ghosted, they get refused pretty quickly. So yeah, I agree that one of the big problems is that the Chinese voices are missing from a lot of these discussions. But when you do participate, as in the case of this executive, you got to have people who speak the local language, English in this case, well, and you have to have some media training. And in the Diggers conversation, the guy looks terrible. I mean, so that's a part of it. So it's not just showing up, but it's showing up well, especially in this social media age where this gets turned into 15 different TikToks and there's no context to it. So, I mean, that's frustrating. In terms of the Chinese missing from the discussion, Cobus, what's your perspective on that as somebody who's been doing this together for the past 15 years? Yeah, I agree with these people that the Chinese should be more active, but they got to be more active then.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in general, Chinese companies tend to kind of like just lie down and crouch, you know, like rather than kind of face hostile media. And you know, and then I think on like the effect of that over time is that when like media workers then or journalists then do get an interview, then they kind of bring their full firepower to the interview because they think they will never get another chance, right? So it kind of like becomes this kind of reinforcing kind of thing. You know, like, yeah, you know, I think more work, which is in media studies, more work analyzing different kinds of external media mining companies, you know, in and how they handle these kind of scandals, you know, not only Chinese ones, would be very illuminating, I think.
Yeah.
A thing that I just want to ask Giroux, actually, just a mining question, is there any like technological advance in the mining world to go beyond tailings dams? Because I've been covering, you know, like more than 20 years ago when I was working as an environmental journalist, tailings dams were collapsing. They were a huge problem.
Maybe we can explain what a tailings dam is, Cobus, because I'm not sure everybody understands what that is.
You know, I think Giroux will probably be able to understand.
Okay, Giroux, why don't you explain what a tailings dam is?
And are we moving towards something that is a different kind of technology where you don't have just this toxic amount of mud sitting there forever?
Are basically a huge kind of basin where mining companies are sending all the, you know, all the residue of processing of minerals they've used to get the minerals out of the ground. It's kind of a huge garbage bin where you put everything there. You put the residue coming from the processing, from the mining, and it contains a lot of chemical products. So basically, it's simple terms, it's just huge basin, a huge basin and garbage dam. And mining company use them because from time to time, in certain cases, that can be used years later to find out to find out all the minerals inside. So some they like to keep it like this because it's much more, it can be useful to a certain extent, but there's not much of a technology to move beyond that, because the reality is the mining industry is a very dirty business where at the end the environment is gonna pay pay the price to a certain extent. So yes, that's it. So in terms of technology, I haven't seen much of a progress into go beyond what we are seeing right now, especially when you have copper and cobalt where you have all those processing happening. Those things are still going to be there. It's not like those chemicals are going to evaporate. You're going to use water to clean up. So this water needs to go somewhere, and you need a place where you're going to stock those water and those residue to protect the environment.
Okay, well, let's get to the last comment that we had. Now, remember, these are just three, and each of these videos that I'm showing you are about 6 or 7 minutes long, and we're just playing 1 or 2 minutes of them. They were very detailed. Of course, they're all in Chinese, and there's no subtitles to it. So, and they're on WeChat, and many people outside of China don't have WeChat. So it's very difficult and to access, but it's really important that people understand that there's another side of this debate and this discourse. Let me go now to our last and our third commentator today, and this one in many ways was the most outspoken.
So the question now is, if you can't avoid going overseas and you can't avoid risk, then what should you do? I think Chinese companies need some backup plans. Plan ahead and diversify risk. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you invest in Zambia, also build a presence in the DRC, Tanzania, and South Africa. Don't just do business, learn the playbook. Western firms in Africa mine plenty, but also buy off tribal chiefs, fund politicians' campaigns, run foundations, and media influence. Chinese companies just work hard.
I think he's talking about us.
Over by one lawsuit. Be tough. If someone wants to cheat you, dare to walk away. If they extort, fight back. Use public opinion offensively. If you yield once, you tell the world you're easy prey. And this isn't isolated. In recent years, Chinese companies have faced similar tactics across Africa and South America. Argentina reneges on debts. Peruvian mines face protests. The DRC outright seizes mining rights. The pattern's the same. Invite China in to build roads and factories, take the money, then later cry pollution, injuries, environment, human rights, hit with lawsuits, forced payouts, or expulsion. Once you're gone, the mines stay and the money's theirs. So stop being naive. This isn't just farmers defending their rights. It's an extension of great power rivalry, economic and political. It's about companies, but also about nations. Chinese firms going abroad must not only know how to make money, but also how to fight wars, economic wars, legal wars, public opinion wars, diplomatic wars. In the end, whoever controls the minerals controls the future. Winning isn't about shouting the loudest, it's about strength, patience, and strategy. So don't be scared by that 80 billion figure. This isn't farmers asking for money, it's capital striking at lifeblood. It's not compensation, it's pure extortion. It's no accident, it's inevitable. But we don't have to fear it, as long as we see the game clearly and play a smart, combined strategy. Africa isn't a trap, it's an opportunity. China isn't some kind of fat sheep waiting to be fleeced, it's a future rulemaker. 80 billion? Ha! Just a reminder that in the next decade, Chinese companies going abroad must both build roads and build a strategy and know how to negotiate and how to fight. Cooperate for win-win outcomes, but stand firm against extortion. That's the bottom line and the future.
Okay, so a lot there. He was much more animated than some of the others, but you heard some of the consistent themes. This is not happening just in Africa. Chinese companies around the world are being hit with this. China is the victim here. That is that we're being hit with human rights allegations, environmental allegations, labor allegations, and whatnot. And then the other thing is that the inability for the Chinese to fight the wars of diplomacy, of media, of law, of environment, and this get tough kind of attitude. So, Giraud, you were trying a hard time to contain yourself, and
he's obviously ignorant of how much Chinese company have built powerful political network in Africa and other global South countries to be able to secure their mining rights and their mining permits. He's obviously has no idea why Chinese companies find themselves alone in countries where no Western companies are wanting to go, because Chinese companies have been able to evolve and build very powerful local network from top to the food chain to the bottom. So what is he talking about? He can talk about the public opinion. Yes, but let's face it, the public opinion in most of those countries does not matter, because in those countries, what the regime say goes. That's why they don't care about public opinion. They care about public opinion in a country where they know that, yes, if we don't win public opinion, we will not be able to win. But in countries where they do know that they have weak institutions and you have powerful regime, they build political network. And it's not even me saying that. Few months back, a Shanghai Institute released a report of saying that they're starting to discourage Chinese company to rely on local political network to do business. They have to start to be building their own business in a way that they shield away from any political turmoil. So no, what he's talking about is only far from the truth. No, Chinese company knows how to fight. Really, they know how to fight. Even they know how to play dirty if they need to, if it needs to be.
And Cobus, isn't it interesting, the mirror image of one another? Because you hear the Americans complaining about the Chinese bribing officials, the corruption, and here you hear this narrative of like, well, the West has the foundations, they have the NGOs, they bribe the leaders, and so both think the other is corrupt and undermining the other. I mean, the similarities. This could have come out of a MAGA right-wing kind of talking point.
And a similar kind of assumption that foreigners are just always out to cheat you, which is also a kind of a MAGA assumption, and the assumption that none of these things are actually real, like human rights abuses, like environmental abuses, none of these actually count as anything.
It's makeup.
So yeah, it's just made up nonsense.
But we're the victim.
So, I mean,
but we're the victim.
Yeah, it's very funny for me. It's like really, but I think I think it's important, I think, for Africans to watch this and to be like, you know what, we're probably going to need some more robust kind of like local regulation.
We're going to need a bigger boat. Obert, so on this point of Africans hearing some of these Chinese perspectives, when I showed these to you earlier this week and shared some of the transcripts of them, this is the first time that I think anybody in Africa outside of the Chinese communities hearing some of these WeChat perspectives, and probably, hearing such an aggressive response to this issue. I think it's probably going to come as a little bit of a surprise to a lot of people in Zambia that this is part of the response in the way that social media in China, and again, social media in China is a very big space, so we don't want to just take a few examples. But if you type in all the keywords for this one, which we did, it comes up decidedly negative. There is nobody supporting the Zambians on WeChat, at least that I could find. What do you think the lessons should be taken away? As Cobus pointed out, there are some lessons here that African stakeholders, in terms of understanding Chinese public opinion on this.
Yeah, I think it's very important for Africans to understand, what the Chinese are thinking about, how, their companies are engaging in the mining sector. And this, conversation we are having, it reminds me of a chat that I had with one of the officials of the China Chamber of Commerce for Metals, CCCMC, when they hosted, a side event during the OECD forum on responsible mining supply chain. So one of the things that they acknowledged, the way a lot of Chinese companies that they want now to build the capacity to engage with the local actors in the areas where they are investing, particularly the communities. And when you look at that statement alone, it shows that the Chinese are also realizing the importance of engaging with the locals, for them to also share their perspectives, but also to hear from the communities themselves, without necessarily either NGOs being the spokesperson for communities. So for me, it shows that they are also waking up that they need to do more in terms of actually engaging. In most of the countries where Chinese companies are investing, you realize that they talk to governments, they talk to the powerful politicians, they talk to the networks that will give them access to the resources, but neglecting a very important stakeholder, which is the communities, the people that are actually impacted directly by whatever investments that. So I think the lesson there, one for the Chinese, is build that capacity for them to engage. But for the Africans is to also understand that China is also looking at how we are interacting with them. A lot of countries are in debt, which is one of the arguments that one of the commentators used, that, you know, Zambia is indebted. It's in serious debt. And obviously, you know, this $80 billion, you know, claim is trying to cover that, which, I mean,
which is ridiculous because you literally have the government backing Sino-Metals. I mean, like,
exactly.
the government's on the other side on their side in all of this.
But another thing, guys, I don't know if you've perceived the undertone of like the Chinese savior complex in all those commentators.
Yes,
that
yes.
we are going to Africa, we are going to help
you.
them, we are talking. They don't mention savior, but the way they're framing it, like, you know, we are coming to your poor country, helping you out, and this is how you are.
That was a very strong
us.
theme.
Yeah.
Very strong theme.
And I was like, come on. I really find it strange. And it really plays out into, I remember the shows on like the Chinese movie saviors in Africa. It's really the undertone of Chinese approach in Africa. We are going to help those Africans. They are poor, and this is how they're thinking us. And they should be grateful. Somehow they should be grateful for what we are doing for them. And this is for me something that needs to change.
We've seen this Chinese savior motif become much more prominent in mainstream media in China over the past 5 or 6 years. Obviously, there was Wolf Warrior, which is the ultimate Chinese savior. But then there is these miniseries that were set in West Africa during Ebola, another miniseries set in East Africa during COVID of doctors coming to sacrifice their families and being away from their families and sacrifice their safety in order to help the Africans. And of course, you see always a Chinese flag being raised at the flagpole and everybody putting their hand over their heart. And then you see out of North Africa, these kind of maybe a fictitious Libya and these evacuations, and the Chinese see the world as a very dangerous, kind of fearful place to be. So a lot of those narratives kind of fit in within this. We've covered a lot of ground, guys. Let's wrap up now by trying to give a few takeaways for people of how they should process all the different sides of this story. So we've got the Zambian government siding with Sino-Metals. We've got Sino-Metals trying to push back. We've got the farmers now suing for vast amounts of money. Now we see Chinese social media really expressing anger. Cobus, help try to put a through line through some of this. How do we process all of that we're seeing for the past 6 months?
Well, I think, you know, here I'm echoing Giroux's point, but I think the through line is still missing. Like, I think it is without objective assessment of how big the impact has actually been, without real assessment of the level of, for example, the you know, are crops grown on the Kafue River banks still viable or not? You know, like, you know, without that kind of like baseline information, it's very difficult to say who's being fleeced and who isn't.
Exactly.
Okay, Obert, what's your kind of final thought on this to help our listeners and our viewers better process all that we've covered? I mean, I'm a little confused, I'll be honest with you.
I think my final thought is that you know, those that are pushing for, you know, Zambians to get justice, the affected communities obviously have to use evidence. You know, courts will not rely, even if we say there's potentially that the justice system might be, you know, not be independent, but I think presenting full facts in terms of the evidence on the ground is what will save them. So I think that is one of the things that they are going to find as a challenge if this matter actually gets to be decided by the courts.
Okay, Giroux, you are going to get the last word.
I'm going to end with a bit of skepticism and all of that. As much as I wish to have more data, more information, but I do believe that in this situation, we'll never get the bottom of the situation, because all the parties involved will always have an agenda to not have the facts right. On the government side, the fact that they want to protect the Chinese company even before the assessment was done is a bad move. The Chinese company will never be in a position to want to say the truth of what happened. And plus, the local communities, let's face it, they're local communities, but we also do know that our local communities, sometimes they do interact and they do encroach into mining projects. So them as well they don't have fully the objective perspective of saying, this is our part of responsibility, this is really what's happening. So in all this situation, all parties internally and externally, being now China and the US and other organizations, do not really want the real truth to come out. And at the end, it's going to be like, which is who has the most powerful narrative and the tool of communication that's going to win this battle, and which is sad at the end.
Okay.
And the problem is then without some kind of, independent assessment, like what will end up being kind of hit is anything that's non-metal coming out of Zambia. So are you eating Zambian blueberries on your cereal this morning, kind of like after kind of absorbing all of this information? I'm not. It's like the agricultural exports from Zambia are now under question, I think. Until there's some kind of like objective assessment.
Legitimate point.
Yeah.
And that is the stupidity of the Zambian government for not insisting on that independent assessment right from the beginning, and not siding with the Chinese company, with Sino-Metals, right away, and saying, we're going to wait for the investigation to be complete. We'll let the legal process come out. But what the Zambian government was thinking. If we don't back Sino-Metals, then all the other Chinese investors are going to flee. And I would put, whatever limited funds I have available down as a bet that the Chinese ambassador was like, listen, Mr. Hichilema, stay in line.
We would appreciate very much if you could back us in this situation.
I'm almost certain of it. I mean, that's what I would do if I was the ambassador. I mean, it's not a huge thing to kind of suggest that the ambassador is pressuring Hichilema. Hichilema, though, would have been better advised to say, listen, Mr. Ambassador, I hear what you're saying, but let me let the legal process play out. Let me let the investigation play out, and then we'll let the facts tell us where we go. But they came out just cheerleading for Sino-Metals. So, okay, I have a feeling that we're going to be back, all four of us, here in about 6 weeks, talking about another update in this big story. This is not a story that's going away, as Cobus pointed out. Now we have to think about agricultural exports coming out of Zambia that could potentially impact far larger populations than just the people who live along the river, and the fish as well. Yeah. So this is a big story. This is a big story.
National park as well.
And tourism. That's right. And you haven't heard the last of the U.S. probably griping about this.
Oh,
they
no.
picked up on this. So, and now Chinese social media. So one of the things we're going to try to do is bring more Chinese voices from Chinese social media. And by the way, since we cannot get Chinese experts to come on the show, and people on YouTube, in the comments, I know you guys have all seen this, they say, why don't you have any Chinese guests? And then I literally come back with these very long answers of like, you are right. We want Chinese guests. We would love to have the Chinese ambassador from Zambia to join us on the show. We would love to have the Sino-Metals GM. We have tried and tried and tried. So it's not because, and literally, I don't think we're going to be the most hostile interview that they're ever going to face out there in the international media. So we want to give them a space to let's hear what they have to say. It's not going to happen. I don't believe it's going to happen anytime soon. Nonetheless, we are at time now. So thank you all for taking the time to join us. Thank you for all your insights. By the way, and I've just received it before we went on air today, Obert has written a very long column on this that will be on the site at ChinaGlobalSouth.com. We'll have it to our subscribers in the newsletter. But also, I want to draw your attention to our View from China section that we have that's edited by our China editor, Han Zhen. And she's the one who found these stories. And so we are putting stories up from a Chinese perspective so that you have that full 360 view of what goes on in a story like this. So go to ChinaGlobalSouth.com. So for Jero in Mauritius, Obert in Zimbabwe, and Cobus in South Africa, thank you all for taking the time to join us. And of course, if you would like to subscribe to the China Global South project to see all the great work that the team is doing, go to ChinaGlobalSouth.com. For those of you watching, you can see the address right there. And of course, if you are a student or a teacher and you'd like to subscribe, we will give you half off the subscription rate. Just email me, eric@ChinaGlobalSouth.com. So for the whole team at CGSP around the world, thank you so much for listening and for watching.